Well, good Shabbos and happy Passover. This is VBS Torah Study for a Shabbos of Passover. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in Los Angeles, joined by my dear teacher and friend, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. Mark, Chag Sameach
Chag Sameach.
and
I'm
Shabbat
already
Shalom.
sick of matzah. Are you sick of
I
matzah yet?
you're already sick. You have
Already
half a
sick of it.
holiday to go.
Because I'm sick of it in an unusual way. I'm sick of it because I love it. I love matzah and butter and jelly, and it's addictive. And I hadn't
Yes.
eaten matzah all year. So all of a sudden I'm eating it and I forgot, God, I love this. And
Mm.
matzah brie and it's like eating cement. So it's just I gotta work on my matzah obsession.
This is a holiday invented by gastroenterologists,
Without a doubt.
without a doubt. So, Mark, you and I have been talking for the last 3 or 4 weeks about what we see going on around us. Um, this is a holiday of hope. This is a holiday of a historic vision that history moves from a place of bondage to a place of liberation. History is a process of finding light, finding hope. But we find very little light and very little hope in the news of the day. There are demonstrations and sometimes very vicious demonstrations on college campuses from coast to coast against Israel, against Israel's prosecution of this war. But what makes it even more difficult for both of us, I think, and for all of us, is that these demonstrations seem to have taken on a viciously violent turn, viciously anti-Semitic, protesting not just the conduct of a war, not asking for liberation or recognition of a Palestinian narrative, but being pro-Hamas, being endorsing the kind of violence and hatred um, that Hamas has promulgated. And we know that Jewish families across the country are very difficult time sending their kids back to school after the holiday. And for those kids who are at school, the question of can you cross the campus without getting harassed? Can you walk down the street near a campus without getting harassed? This is a kind of a very difficult moment for us all. Franklin Foer, who's a wonderful journalist, published a very long form article, The Atlantic, where he predicted that this is the end of the golden age of American Judaism. That from the post-war, from after the Second World War, post-war American Judaism has been a wonderfully optimistic story of a rebuilding after destruction, absorbing refugees from Europe and around the world, supporting the creation of a state of Israel, supporting an incredible infrastructure of institutions, and basically living without the specter of anti-Semitism. And in this last year, we have seen the anti-Semitism return with a vengeance and return, of course, in the strangest places one would have expected. Might have expected it to return on the political right, those guys in Charlottesville with the torches. But instead, we see it on college campuses. We see it among young people who are purportedly fighting for social justice.
On the
And
left, on the
on the
left.
left, right, on the left. And Foer, in his article, says this is the turning point and a new era is about to begin. And we're going to have to calculate resistance, calculate anti-Semitism, calculate where we exactly belong in the American cultural landscape, the American political landscape. It's a very difficult article to read. It's a very depressing article to read. Again, especially this time of year when we're trying to go from Genai L'Shevach, from oppression and denigration to liberation and dignity. But what do we make of this today?
Okay. Well, first there's the Haggadah, Me'avdut Lecherut. The first message of the Haggadah has to be the first lesson for our lives. This is a journey, a story from enslavement to liberation. So we're in the stage of the journey where we're in the enslavement period right now. We're in a country enslaved by anti-Semitic hatred. And we will move forward. Now, I want to take the counter point of view, which I began a couple weeks ago, which is to encourage people in general, my students in particular, and young rabbis, absolutely, to be more optimistic and hopeful, even in the face of these difficult news reports. And here's my evidence of why I think there's reason to hope. All right? In other instances of anti-Semitism, particularly, of course, the one that comes to mind most vividly, of course, is Weimar Germany before World War II. The fact is that the Jews of Germany were never integrated into German society, even in the Weimar period, at the level that American Jews are integrated into American society. And therefore, when Kristallnacht occurs on November 8th, 1938, with the burning of books and the burning of synagogues, there wasn't a mass web of support from non-Jewish Germans to Jewish Germans. There was some support, but not a lot. America is different. It's different in several important ways that I believe will stop the spread of anti-Semitism at the gates of these universities, which are crazy places. Here's my evidence for why I'm hopeful. First is evidence that's almost always used by conservative Jews and demographically aware Jews, and that is intermarriage. Almost half of all marriages involving Jews right now involve an unconverted non-Jew. There are millions of Christian families who have Jewish sons-in-law or daughters-in-law. Millions. Their willingness to allow America to become an anti-Semitic country is very low. In fact, it's non-existent. They are supportive of their Jewish son-in-law and their in-laws and their culture, the Jewish culture and religion. That's number one. Number two, at the time of the Holocaust, there were less than 5%. There may have been 2 or 3 Jewish congressmen at the time. Now 20% of Congress is Jewish. That's a huge number. And that number will not go away. And that number will never betray Israel. The third reason I have for hope is that when Iran attacked Israel, which was a major event, because let's face, as we know, this is the first time Israel has ever been attacked by Iran. That attack of missiles, which also, for the first time, were launched at Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Now, the Persians are Muslims, but they're not Arabs. But no one would ever target the Jerusalem because a missile, God forbid for them, could hit the Dome of the Rock or the Mosque of Omar. That attack was repulsed, not just by Israel, but by Saudi Arabia and Jordan and France and America. And that's huge. That's gigantic. It means that in the midst of all of this war, Israel has supporters in the Arab world. They're not going away. They understand that Iran is the enemy and Israel isn't the enemy. They understand that Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization. That's why Egypt won't let the refugees into the desert and into Egypt, because they don't want a Hamas cadre undermining al-Sisi and Egypt. So that's another point of hopefulness. And the other point I have is a more general one. And that is that in my experience of reading about history, evil always overextends itself.
Mm.
Hitler overextended himself by trying to massacre all the Jews and kill all the Jews of Europe. And in doing so, he diverted important resources at the time of the Battle of Stalingrad and others, and it weakened him and ultimately lost the war. It is absolutely clear to me that if you are a non-Jew and you're going across the Golden Gate Bridge to give birth at a hospital, and these crazies have blocked the bridge, that's not going to give you a warm, fuzzy feeling about Hamas. If you're, as there was a woman trying to give birth on the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's blocked by the demonstration there, and you're not Jewish, but you're just trying to get across the bridge, and they block you, you're not going to love Hamas because of it. So I believe that evil overextends itself. The violence of the attack on Israel is palpable, and I believe that ultimately the war will end. However many hostages are alive will be returned, and there will be some massive Arab Marshall Plan to rebuild Gaza. And as soon as all that, and there'll be peace treaties between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And as soon as all that happens, if it does, God willing, as soon as that happens, Iran is irrelevant. It's just irrelevant. Because, and these demonstrations go away. What are they going to demonstrate about when there's a commission on the Palestinian state that's negotiating between Israel and the Palestinians, however long it takes, however many years it'll take? What's going to happen? They're not going to have any fuel in their tank to demonstrate that. There won't be anyone to support them. Now, none of this may happen. All of it may happen. Some of it may happen. But my point is this. When we read the Haggadah and we say, L'dor v'dor, in every generation, people have risen up to destroy us, and the Holy One, praised be He, has saved us from their hands, that's not a metaphor. I believe in that. I believe that completely, and I believe it in my soul. And even though there's a lot of evidence that there's hatred out there, let's not forget, we're viewing all of this stuff through the lens of the media, which has one principal ideology. I learned it when I was on Good Morning America. If it bleeds, it leads. And that means the most violent and awful stories always come first. Let's not forget that there's massive parts of America where people support Israel, where people love Jews, where kids eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and go to school unafraid, and where Pesach occurs without fear. And there's lots of campuses. Yes, there's campuses with demonstrations, but there's lots of campuses that are safe. Texas is now safe thanks to the lieutenant governor there, Abbott. Florida schools are safe. Other schools are safe. And so it may take some further sorting as to where you send your kid. I'm not sure I'm recommending to anybody to send their kid to Columbia. But what I'm saying is this. There's a lot of support out there for the Jewish community and for Israel that did not exist in 1933. And we have to remember that. And we can't ever deny that. We have to keep in our heart and our soul the knowledge that this war cannot be won by Jews alone. It can only be won by Jews and our friends. And that when we say an Erev Rav left Egypt, the rabbis say, it says in the Torah, an Erev Rav, which means a mixed multitude. It means that non-Jews left Egypt too with us. And it means that our fate and the fate of all people who want freedom are inexorably intertwined forever and ever.
Well, thank you. That helped. Because I know a lot of families sat down to Seder this last week
I know.
and had a really hard time
Yes,
reading prayers and statements of hope and redemption, liberation.
I know.
Given the headlines in the newspaper, given the experience of their children on college campuses, so I really appreciate it. I really do appreciate that perspective. I'm not going to push back in the sense of I don't want to make people cry. We all know what's out there to make people cry. I just want to add a piece of historical context to this. My great grandfather, your great grandfather, reading today's newspaper, would not respond the way we do because they wouldn't have expected anything different. Because the fact is that they wouldn't have expected a diaspora country, a place where Jews live, to treat us any better than the experiences they had when they were, Europe, Morocco, Iraq, take your choice. I mean, the fact is that the late 20th century has been a unique moment in Jewish history. At the beginning of the 20th century, Jews were forced out of all of these places. We were forced out of Eastern Europe. We were forced out of Western Europe. The Holocaust came and destroyed those who didn't leave. Those in the Levant, those in the East, were pushed out after 1948 when Israel was created. But the post-war American and Israeli Jewish story is a story of the taking of power. Up until the post-war era, we really didn't have a role in history. We
Right.
sort of ducked underneath history, right? There are very, very few armies led by Jewish generals. I think there's one in Spain, and we created our own internal cultures. But what happens is that in the 20th century, we emerge into history, and then at the late 20th century, we made a decision that we will enter history with both feet and we will take power. And taking power comes with responsibility and a lot of vulnerability. I mean, the reason why the rabbis of the tradition took us out of history when the temple was destroyed in 70 was because they perceived that as a small, sort of militarily vulnerable people, they didn't want to rest our entire identity on our political entity, on a political entity. They created a spiritual community that had more durability. Theodore Herzl saw the foolishness of that in the mid-19th century, late 19th century, that it was time to return to history because we would no longer survive without a material base, without a country, without an army, without a flag. And that after the Holocaust, that became acute, that became particularly important as a powerful statement of who we are. That was what we did. And we banked on two promises: the promise of American liberalism in America, the promise on Israeli sovereignty. And both of those promises have been shaken, and that's why we feel the way we do. The question is, have they been shaken? Have they been broken? That's really the great question. And you're arguing, I think, so articulately that they have not been broken.
No.
They have been shaken, but not broken. And that's the reason why we feel unsettled this Pesach. The promise of American liberalism, that this is a society that welcomes and accepts and treats us as equals, that's been shaken. And the promise of Israeli sovereignty, that Zionism, that a Jewish state would protect us, protect its people from history, that's been shaken as well. But at the moment, both of them are holding. But what's ironic is that what we're tasting now, and this was what was said after October 7th in Israel. After October 7th in Israel, people were saying, well, we've re-entered Jewish history again. And they mean is we've tasted, not, it's like maror, you don't have to experience slavery, you just got to taste a little bit of it. We've tasted a bit of the helplessness and the vulnerability that our grandparents felt. We tasted a little bit of that weakness, that victimhood that our grandparents felt, that brought them to America, that brought them to Israel. And that's the sort of bitterness in our taste at the moment. The question is, how do we reassert this? Where do we put ourselves? Where do we find a refuge in this really confusing moment of history? And I think that your prescription is very, very important. Look for the friends. look for the allies, look for the political places and the political people, look for the cultural expressions of those who are willing to stand with us and stand by us and help us to rebuild those promises.
Look, I agree, and I think that's well said. But I want to even push further into hope. I want to say not only has it been shaken, it's been strengthened. My hope has been strengthened. And let me explain why. Let's look at the two threats that Israel faces. All right, the attack from Gaza and the attack from Hezbollah in the north. All right, those are the only real threats that they face, which are really the same threat since Iran funded Hamas. I ask people in the depths of their despair and anger, when I can calm them down, I say, oh, just time out here. Yes, we want to go in. Yes, we want to kill all the terrorists we can kill. Get rid of the leadership, get rid of them, get the hostages out, number one. Okay, but I said, and yes, it was a total mess up, a complete oversight, and people will be fired and voted out of office for it. It's very clear because they missed all the signs of this. All that's true. But I said, does the killing of even 1,200 Israelis, innocent Israelis, men, women, and children, does that threaten the existence of the state? No. No. What are they going to do? Invade Tel Aviv? What they have an army that they're going to invade Jerusalem? This is nonsense. There is no threat to the state from this terrible pogrom that must be avenged. 100%. But there's no threat. And then you say, well, okay, but there's a threat from Iran. They could get da. Yeah, there's a threat there, but look what happened. We have already a rehearsal of how it's not a threat. If Iran really wanted to destroy Israel, they could send a nuclear weapon that they buy from God knows where and send it into Tel Aviv and blow up Tel Aviv, blow up Jerusalem. They could do that, but they didn't because they're not completely crazy. They're crazy, but not self-destructive crazy. What did they do? So they send some missiles up and then missiles get knocked down. And what does Israel do? It goes back and it bombs somewhere in near Isfahan, which is a camel dump, doing nothing with nothing. So what it shows is that Iran is absolutely not willing, for whatever reasons, maybe Russia is holding them back, maybe, I don't know. But for whatever reason, they're not prepared to start a war from the north. Gaza doesn't threaten Israel's existence from the southwest. So what you have is a situation in which the future is now fairly clear, that the Arab world has mobilized against Iran, and that this has helped the possibility of an Israel-Arab rapprochement,
right,
that will create a new entity in the future, hopefully address the suffering of the Palestinians and their desire for a state, which will be, we all understand, negotiated over God knows how many years in the future, but will begin. And what will certainly happen is a worldwide, but mainly Arab, Marshall Plan to rebuild an entire state, an entire area of Gaza, clear out the rubble, build new homes, build hospitals, get rid of the tunnels, make sure that it's a functioning society, unafraid of being dominated by Hamas, find some moderate leaders who can fill in there. And that's the future there. That's the future. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying, I look at the actual future of Israel, and the two greatest threats it has just faced are not existential threats, the way politicians like to say, that all of a sudden Israel might not exist. That's ridiculous. Just ridiculous. When missiles come from Iran, and the Saudis help you knock them out of the air? Doesn't that tell you anything? Doesn't that tell you that the future is different than the past? That somehow forces are coalescing here? And in terms of the future of the golden age of American Jewry, I think Foer is completely wrong, and that there's a greater golden age of Jewry up ahead. I mean, you know people, I know people who have who have wealth that make the Rothschilds look like paupers. I mean, what Michael Bloomberg can do with $20 billion is amazing. What has happened with Birthright is amazing. What's happened with the interplay of Jewish power and CEOs is extraordinary, and that's not going anywhere. This web of relationships isn't going to be destroyed. And Elon Musk isn't going to say to someone, I won't do business with you because you're Jewish. There hasn't been even a whisper of that. There's hardly any investment banking houses that won't hire Jews. There used to be no investment banking houses that hired Jews. There's almost no hospitals that won't hire Jewish doctors, none that I know of, none my brother knows of, and he's a surgeon. And there used to be lots of hospitals that wouldn't hire Jewish doctors. That's why we built Albert Einstein and the other web of Jewish. So stop. You're talking about a community of such vast power and wealth and influence. The one thing that I will give into to those who are shrine Gewalt, the one thing I will say, well, you're right about this, is that we are training ignorant Jews. We are training Jews who don't know enough. These kids who go to campus are not only being scared by the protests, but they don't know how to answer the protests. They don't know about the history of Israel. They don't know about anything. Some of them do. Some are literate. Some have gone to day school. Some have been educated by you. All the students from VBS are literate. But by and large, they don't have an emotional attachment to Israel. That's what Birthright tried to address. And I think we have to address it at a lower level. We have to make sure that families visit Israel, and not just the way you visit Florence. You know, you have to visit it in which there's interactions between American Jewish
I want to
families.
interrupt you for just a second because I
So
had an
that's my-
experience. No. It was wonderful. I'm not. I don't want to interrupt you. I want to interrupt to add something to you. So last year I was invited to attend to join a March of the Living program in Eastern Europe. So I led a group from the synagogue.
Tell people what that is.
So March of the Living is a program started 35 years ago to bring high school kids to Europe to visit the concentration camps and sites of the principal ghettos of Poland. Spent a week in Poland. And some years ago, they started inviting adult groups to join them. And then we go from there, you go to Israel, and celebrate Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaut. And the contrast between the two is quite remarkable. A lot to be said about that, but I have to tell you that I've been studying this stuff for a long time, and I have visited concentration camps before, but I was deeply moved by the experience. And I'll tell you why, because it's one thing to learn a history, to read it in books, to see it in films, to hear testimonies. It touches you, it moves you, it gives you a set of a worldview, a mindset. It's a whole nother thing to go there, right? One of the first things you realize when you walk into Auschwitz is just how big it is. It's miles square, and you see the operation. You see how big this thing is and how sophisticated was this operation to destroy the Jewish people. You visit Majdanek or Treblinka, these horrible places, and you just feel the power of evil in these places. And it changes the way that you look at the world. I have to tell you, I came back very changed, very different. And I have been studying this stuff my whole life since I was a kid. Of survivors in my family and whose stories that we knew very, very, very well. It's very different to stand there. It's very different to stand there with friends, to stand there with young people, and to experience this together. So part of that emotional experience, to understand the terms of Jewish history, particularly the terms, the parameters of Jewish history in the late 20th and now 21st century, is to include that experience as well. I don't want to scare people. I don't want people to think that there's a Nazi under every bed and behind every corner, but I want you to understand how very real evil is, how very, very real evil is, and how proximate it is, how much it can take over a society and take over very good people and co-opt them into acts that are very difficult, very, very difficult to understand and accept. I think that's part of the experience.
Yeah, I agree. That's an important addition. I used to tell families, I used to call them up when they left the synagogue after their bar mitzvah, and we had that because I ran a bar mitzvah mill, sadly. I'd like to think I made it more than that, and maybe I did. I hope I did. But anyway, I would call them up and I'd say, what do you know? Tell me some area of human thought or experience that you know everything you need to know for your whole life by the time you're 13 years old. Tell me, do you know enough history at 13 to last you your whole life? No. Do you know enough philosophy? No. Do you know enough about psychology? No. You don't know enough about anything when you're 13. Why do you think your children know enough about being Jewish at 13 so that you could end their Jewish life? Why do you think that?
Was anyone ever convinced?
Yeah, I convinced some people to stay.
Yeah.
But other than that, some people said, without using these exact words, of course, Rabbi, you don't understand the nature of the transaction we had with you. Our transaction was we pay you whatever you want to educate our children for 4 years. And then it became 3 years. And
Whatever, yeah.
whatever, exactly. And after that, we're out of here.
Mm.
Now, we aren't out of here, if I can add to the speech they never actually gave me. We're not out of here, Rabbi, because of the money. We could afford it. We're out of here because Judaism doesn't mean that much to us. And the reason it doesn't mean that much to us, Rabbi, is that our lives are about assimilating into America. All the Jewish education we get and our children get tends to separate them from America.
I see. I'm not sure that's the answer, Mark. I'm not sure. I'm going to argue with that.
Good,
I
because
don't think it's the
I'm just
assimilation
inventing what I think they would say.
No, I think what they're trying to tell you is, Rabbi, we derive the meaning of our existence from other sources besides Judaism. We enjoy Judaism. Judaism is bagels and lox on a Sunday morning. Judaism is a Seder, short Seder on Passover, maybe a breakfast after the Yom Kippur service. But typically, we define the morals of our life. We define the purposes of our life. The language we use to express our identity is not a Jewish language. It's a fully American language.
Right.
And we're interested in the gifts and privileges of being an upper class American, of having money and having vacations and nice homes and material things and material success and its enchantments is where we derive our sense of meaning. And our community is not a community involved in Jewish things. Our community is our country club, our golf club, our swim club, our bridge club. And these are our friends, our gym. These are the places we make our friends. And so, Rabbi, we don't need you anymore. And I think the word you use, which was so very important, is transaction. If it remains transactional, of course they're not going to stay. They're only going to stay if there's a relationship. And the people who love you and care for you and cherish your connection with them, well, those are the people that are going to stay. Those are the people going to stay.
Yeah, but that's what we need to do a better job of, is to
Yeah.
make sure that the Jews we send out into the world know something.
Well, here I'm gonna evoke the Torah for this week as we conclude our conversation, because the Haftorah, the prophetic section that we'll read Shabbos, is a very, very famous chapter from the prophet Yechezkel, Ezekiel, chapter 37, called the Valley of the Dry Bones. Ezekiel is a unique prophet in the Bible because he's a prophet of diaspora. He's a prophet who went into exile with the people of Israel, came from a priestly family, goes into exile, and becomes a prophet by the waters of Babylon. And he prophesies to the Babylonian Jewish community. And this was the first great diaspora Jewish community worried about its fate in history. Sound familiar? And the story is that the community was losing its connection and losing its hope. And the parable of the dry bones is that the prophet is taken out to this place covered with bones, and God asks him, Son of man, do you think these bones can live? And he says, of course not, they're dead. And he says, and the prophet says to God, this is my people Israel. And God says to him, yes, and I will make them live again. And the prophet says, no, you have to understand. And the words that are used are important. It's avda tikvatenu. We have lost our hope. So that when Hatikva was written, when the poem Hatikva was written, he added the phrase lo avda tikvatenu as a commentary on Ezekiel's Haftorah. That's the connection. And then, of course, the bones come together and they are resurrected into people. And the prophet is told, this is my people Israel that will be resurrected from this moment. It is the hope that you spoke about before. And it's because this people has a remarkable resilience. And I think unfortunately, that's the thing that kids don't get if they leave at 13. They don't understand that they have a role to play in the cultural conversation of creating a Judaism of today and tomorrow. They don't have the language to join the conversation. And that's the resilience of the Jewish people, is to create that Judaism. Look, no rabbi had ever in all of Jewish history sat with a Catholic priest on national television and talked
who
about.
did that? Who did that?
Yes, exactly. You are part of the conversation of creating a new Judaism.
Yeah.
You're part of the conversation of it's an expression of the resilience of this people and its unending hopefulness as it goes forward in history. And that's what we hope. That's the hope that we hope we can grasp onto at this really difficult moment of our history. So, Mark, I want to wish you a good Shabbos and the rest of a good Pesach. And to all of us who are watching, let's find some hope this Shabbos. Let's find something to hold on to.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael. Let's hold on to our friends and hold on to our vision of hope. Have a wonderful Shabbat and a wonderful rest of Pesach. And Tuesday night, or Monday night, whichever you celebrate, when the holiday ends, have a pizza and think of us. Take good care.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.